Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you again so much for joining tonight's Rally for the Two Rivers meeting. My name is Allison Jones. I am the Watershed Program Coordinator for Clean Ocean Action. I'm going to start us off tonight with a few logistical details just to make sure that everything runs smoothly for our meeting. So first, please note that this meeting is being recorded. The recording of the meeting will be made publicly available. And following tonight's meeting, registered attendees will receive an email with a link to view that recording. That follow-up email is also going to include links to various resources that we will be discussing tonight, including the DEP's FAQ page on the fish die-off, the Rally for the Two Rivers Facebook page, and instructions for how you can sign up to receive emails from Rally for the Two Rivers. Following the Facebook page and or signing up for emails is the best way to receive meeting reminders and updates about water quality in the Navesink and Shrewsbury Rivers. During tonight's meeting, we've allotted time for moderated Q&A sessions with our speakers. So thank you to the many attendees who submitted their questions in advance. During the Q&A sessions, we are going to pose questions to speakers that are pulling a little bit from the compiled list of the pre-submitted questions, but we will also be accepting and posing questions that have been submitted live here through the chat, or I'm sorry, through the Q&A. So to submit a question during tonight's meeting, please use the Q&A tool. The chat is disabled at the bottom of your screen. When you're submitting a question, if you'd like, we would certainly appreciate if you'd like to include your title and or your organization affiliation, if that's applicable. So with those details out of the way, I will turn it over to Cindy Ziff, Executive Director of Clean Ocean Action.
Hi, Allison. Thank you so much. And thank you, all of you, for joining us for this very, very special Rally for the Two Rivers meeting, focusing on the massive fish die-off this year. Certainly a most concerning and uncomfortable event for so many in the region and beyond. I'm going to speak a little bit quickly because I know we all want to get to we're all here to learn and to ask questions of the most knowledgeable speakers. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, this is our regularly scheduled meeting of the Rally for the Two Rivers, a focused alliance of around 30 organizations and all municipalities working to improve water quality in the Navesink and the Shrewsbury Rivers. And it is coordinated by Clean Ocean Action. Based on this model, we have also started programs in the Barnegat Bay and in Deal Lake and have established a citizen science monitoring lab in our new office in Long Branch. The alliance partners and municipalities also each apply their skills and knowledge to help improve water quality in the region. So it's really a tight-knit mesh of folks working to improve and protect the water. Most important partners, of course, are all of you and how each of you can help protect the river. So more of that, more of that will be discussed at the end. But as mentioned, tonight's meeting is a little unique, and we are most grateful to our speakers. I thought it would be helpful to just provide, for those of you that may not have access to the agenda, a quick run through as to how tonight is gonna flow. First, we will hear from the New Jersey DEP officials who will talk in two specific areas. First, of course, is what has happened to the river and what are the public health and ecosystem effects. We will then, as Allison said, open it up for questions, which will be moderated by Allison. Secondly, the department will then discuss their next steps and how citizens can help. That follow-up opportunity for questions will be moderated by Dr. Swarna Muthukrishnan, Clean Ocean Action staff scientist. This panel will be followed by a presentation concerning all the cleanup actions and the activity to get the fish off the beaches and our waterways by New Jersey Senator Vin Gopal and Mayor Jay Coffey and Councilwoman Megan Walker from Oceanport. That will be moderated by Kari Martin. As Allison said in her opening remarks, given this is a virtual meeting, posting your questions in the Q&A option is most important. All of these questions will be a part of the public record, and we will get to as many as we can and follow up with the ones that we can't through other medium that Allison will review at the end. And then we will all wrap it up and talk about next steps. But now I am most grateful, we all are most grateful to the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection for attending this rally meeting. These speakers have deep, deep roots and commitments to New Jersey and all of its natural resources and wonders, and they do tremendous work for all of us. And I urge you all to read their bios that are linked in the chat. Ray Bukowski is the Assistant Commissioner for Natural and Historic Resources. He covers everything from fish to forests to museums, all of our many favorite natural and cultural resources. So he has a lot to handle there, and we're very grateful for him to and what he does. He will be facilitating the overall New Jersey DEP presentations, and these are by Dr. John Lovey. He is the New Jersey fish pathologist. Jan is also the only veterinarian at the DEP, I understand. He has been monitoring the spinning fish in particular with our staff scientists since 2017. So he has a lot of knowledge to bring on this topic. And Bob Schuster is the Bureau Chief of the Marine Water Monitoring Office. Bob and his team test all of our coastal waters and marine waters to make sure they are safe for people and fish, particularly in the summertime. He and his lab supervisor, Bill Heddendorf, are no strangers to the Rally for the Two River meetings. They have been coming to all the meetings for all these years, and we're very grateful for the hard work they do. For this panel, I will be kind of lurking in the sidelines, moderating at their request, keeping an eye on the clock. Now I'm turning it all over to you, Ray, and thanks again, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's 7 o'clock and everybody's gearing up for Memorial Day weekend, but it's an important topic. I just want to stress that from the outset here that DEP has been focused on this for quite a long period of time. The importance, we understand the impacts to quality of life in and around the rivers. We also share in all the concern that everyone has for natural resources, making sure that our fish populations are healthy, understanding what potential health effects it could have on human beings. So we've been putting in an awful lot of effort into this. I think we have a pretty decent amount of information to share with you all tonight. I cannot promise we have answers to every single question that are out there, but we will continue to take your questions and provide you an update as to what we are doing currently and what we will continue to do as we move forward in trying to address as many of these issues as we can. So a couple of things I just wanted to cover at a very high level is to make sure that everybody understands exactly what is occurring. Menhaden, or as many people who live in and around the rivers know them as Bunker, and I do too. This is not a new issue, and it is not only an issue in and around the Navesink and the Shrewsbury rivers. This type of an issue with these die-offs of Bunker have been occurring and documented all the way back to the 1950s and occurs outside of these two rivers and has been really studied and focused on since the 80s from Rhode Island all the way down to Virginia. And, fortunately, it is not just an issue on these two rivers, but it is an issue that we were trying to understand the best that we can so that we can take any steps that we possibly can to minimize any of these impacts to the fish populations and to minimize the effects on everyone's quality of life. Another thing that I really wanted to make sure that we all understand from the onset here is that there's a bit of a marked difference between a fish die-off and a fish kill. Unfortunately, we in our region, in our estuaries, experience both. So let me try to frame that out a little bit. A fish kill, we would refer to something where, we would call it a hypoxic event, and Dr. Jan Lovey can explain that a little bit better later on. But what that means is depleted oxygen. There's bunker travel in very dense schools. They get into very tight bodies of water, sometimes chased by predators. We did experience, many people on this call are probably very familiar with the situation that occurred in the Shark River several years ago. They get into a very dense school. They consume and respire all the oxygen in the water column, and we have a kill where all of a sudden a massive amount of fish die in one fell swoop. What is occurring at this time and has been for quite some time since last fall. We've been monitoring and following this, doing a lot of research, is what we would call a die-off, because they're being affected by something completely different. And as everyone has seen, they're unfortunately dying off much slower and progressively through the school and transmitting it. And I'm going to leave some of those details to Dr. Lovey and to Bob Schuster, who are going to follow me. However, I'm going to stop for now so that we can answer some of your questions and save as much time as we can. So with that, I want to introduce Dr. Jan Lovey, and also Bob Schuster will follow him very quickly so we can talk specifics on what is happening to the fish, what we know, and what we do not know, and also the next steps that we're taking to learn more. So, Jan.
Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here tonight. So happy to talk about some of the results that we have and hope to answer some of your questions on this. So great introduction. Thanks, Ray. Important context that there's a bit of a history of these spring mortality events in the Chesapeake and New Jersey, New York Bight with Atlantic menhaden. That goes back as early as the 50s. So I think that's important to keep in mind. This particular mortality event that we had this spring has been a pretty chronic duration, as was just talked about. When those hypoxic events happen, low dissolved oxygen, these are kills that happen within 24 hours. And what we've been dealing with here over the course of probably over 2 months now, the earliest report of this current die-off has been since March 25th. So we're about 2 months into it. So these more chronic duration mortalities are usually linked to some infectious nature, like a bacteria, which is what we've documented in this case. So I've been investigating this since the onset, and we've done a couple follow-ups since then. Since this has been lasting for so long, we've actually gone out into Natco Lake, the Navesink, Shrewsbury Rivers, and have done periodic samplings through our earliest in March, then a couple through April, and all the way into May. And what we've confirmed with all those fish is that it's a bacterial disease that's affecting them. It's known as vibriosis, caused by the bacterium Vibrio anguillarum. Something to keep in mind with Vibrio species, they're a highly diverse group of bacteria that are found in marine environments. They're found in a lot of aquatic animals as well. This one in particular, Vibrio anguillarum, is not one that we have human health concerns with. I know there's a couple of Vibrio species out there that do have some human health implications. Vibrio anguillarum, the one that we're dealing with, is mostly a finfish pathogen, though it's been documented in some shellfish and crustacean populations as well. From our observations to date over the period of the 2 months is that we've been seeing only Atlantic menhaden affected by this bacterial disease. So with Vibrio anguillarum, a little background, this is a pretty common bacterium in marine environments. We can find it out in the environment, and also very likely it's part of the intestinal flora of the fish. So the fish are naturally probably carrying low levels of this bacterium already. It is pretty widespread. So what we suspect is happening is that there's some stressors that are triggering this sort of bacterial outbreak with Vibrio anguillarum, and that's kind of culminating in this die-off that we've been seeing over a period of 2 months. So something that you were probably observing since you're out there is the fish are erratically swimming. They're circling at the surface, kind of spinning around. What we're seeing in the laboratory is that the infections of this bacterium are actually getting pretty high in the brain of the fish, which is causing these sort of neurological symptoms. So that I hope does explain some of the symptoms that you're seeing with that spinning behavior with them. It is a systemic bacterial disease, so it's getting throughout the whole fish. So we're continuing our surveillance. I can say May 12th was the last time that I surveyed for this bacterium. And compared to April, I did not notice as many dying fish from it. It was actually difficult to get the sample, and I'm hoping that that's an indication that this is the tail end of this mortality. But we're going to continue doing surveillance as long as fish are dying out there, just to confirm that we're still dealing with this bacterial disease. So something that we're noting more recently in some of the samples that we're testing is we've got a second bacterial species that we are seeing not as regularly as Vibrio anguillarum, but we're seeing it in a few fish, and it might be having an impact. And that's the bacterium Yersinia ruckeri, which we've recently been identifying, especially in that May sample that we took from the fish. This is a bacterium that's predominantly known as a finfish pathogen. So likely the fish are carrying this, and we're probably seeing it later on in this mortality. Maybe it's acting as an opportunistic pathogen and it's coming out later on in an already stressed group of fish. So this bacterium also doesn't pose human health risks that we're aware of, mostly a pathogen of trout and salmon. So we have documented that now in these fish as well. So just a second bacterial species that we've seen associated with mortality. So that's what's causing the mortality. We think that there's probably, it's difficult to pinpoint what could be triggering as far as stressors that could be triggering this actual bacterial outbreak. And it's most likely, like any wild fish mortality, we're not going to find a single smoking gun or a single stressor that's triggering these. And rather, it's probably going to be a culmination of factors that could be natural stressors in the fish population, which could be spawning stress. They're highly migratory fish that could add to the stressors. They've recently overwintered. In the springtime, we actually document in a lot of different species that these mortalities occur more frequently with infectious diseases because fish are somewhat immunocompromised in the spring, coming out of the winter, and we get fluctuating temperatures in the water, which is an added stressor to it. So we are aware that there's a lot of natural stressors that are present in the population, and we believe that it's probably a culmination or a mixture of these various elements that are stressing these fish populations as well, which is causing this sort of bacterial outbreak. So I think that's the sort of what I've prepared as far as what our updates are, what's causing this, why we think it's happening. And I think I'll stop there and let Bob fill in some of the other details, and I'd be happy to answer other questions that come up.
Thanks, Jan. As Jan said, as Vibrios go, there are multiple species of it. So just to follow up on that, there's actually 70 species of Vibrio that exist in the environment. As you pointed out, they're typically found in the environment. They are there. If we look for them, we will find them. There's a handful of Vibrios that do affect humans. This is not one of them. So the pathogens that are affecting these fish are not a human health concern. The ones that are human health concerns are things that we monitor under the shellfish program. So we will monitor shellfish and have done studies throughout Delaware Bay. So there are periodic illnesses from around the country of things from shellfish, usually due to improper handling and growth of Vibrios. So it's something to keep in mind that there are other species of it. This is not one in this area that will affect humans. When it comes to other pathogens and the effect of the fish kill, I think it's important to note that we do go out and monitor waters routinely for shellfish waters. We've been out at least once a month throughout that area during this fish kill. What we want to stress on that from a human health perspective, the bacteria levels, the dead fish in the water were not affecting bacteria levels that are things that we would be concerned with for such as recreational bathing or for our classification of shellfish waters. So we have collected samples for that. We've also worked with Monmouth County Health Department to get some additional samples to look at any potential impact from this fish die-off on bacteria levels in the water column. So on both occasions, we did not see any levels of concern or exceedances in the main bodies of the rivers for recreational bathing on the time we were out or the health department was out. We will continue, as Jan said, we'll continue doing other work. We will always continue to monitor those waters. We are also, as Cindy mentioned, doing other work, still looking at non-point source of pollution that impacts just general bacteria levels in those rivers. So that's still an ongoing process with Clean Ocean Action, citizen monitoring with the Navesink River Municipalities Committee. So that's an ongoing process that is continuing. So looking from the public health side, At this point, we are not seeing an issue with the water quality, so I would not be concerned with, paddle boarding, other activities. When it comes to fish consumption themselves, I know this has been a question of concern. As this bacteria does not affect, humans, it is not a concern from the consumption of fish side. Always cooking fish. One thing about cooking fish, when you cook anything, you're killing the bacteria. So that's just an added, component to it. But we do not see any impact as far as consumption of fish from those locations. Looking at the questions, that have come in, just as a follow-up to that, for people that would like more information on and I will share the link with Cindy to put out there. Our department, through Science and Research Department of Health, does have fish consumption advisories throughout all different areas of the state. Those are posted online. Their update summaries are posted online. We can certainly share links for people that have concerns. They have guidance on what you can do to, how to clean fish, how to clean crabs, what to do, and where concerns are. There are maps along that also have, water body specific issues that they might have found. So this is all publicly available. It's already available, so I will share that link. So from that viewpoint, there is a wealth of information and a wealth of work that is done along those lines already. So I'll pass it back to Cindy or Ray.
Thanks, Bob and Jan. And Cindy, if you don't mind, I'm going to make a couple of comments to just tighten up a couple things for everybody on the call to understand. So I think most of us probably realize that no one consumes menhaden, at least not directly. They are used as bait fish. They do have quite a bit of use commercially and industrially, and could end up in feeds and whatnot. The menhaden population overall is very healthy. We've been getting that question a lot. People have been asking, is this going to affect the menhaden stock? The answer is obviously yes, because there is some mortality. However, overall, the stock is very high, very healthy across the entire region. And one thing that we do note is that, as we have mentioned, these die-offs have been documented for decades, and it does appear that there is something of a trend that we will be looking into more and more as time goes on, that there is a trend and a correlation between the size of the stock and the amount of impact on the fish that are succumbing to the bacteria, meaning that the more fish that there are, especially in some of these really dense areas up into the headwaters of the rivers, and they become a little bit more impacted because there are more fish and they become ill quicker. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. And I think what Bob is getting at as well is that, we're seeing a lot of questions coming in already in the Q&A, and we've had for the last couple of months, people asking about effects on other fish. We'll talk about this more in our next steps, but I really wanted to be clear right now that we have not had documented cases of other predatory fish, game fish like striped bass and bluefish, things like that, that have succumbed to this bacteria. As Jan had pointed out, the bacteria is present. It's present in the ocean water. It's present in all the estuaries. The other fish are not succumbing to it, which does tend to make us believe that there are stressors on the menhaden themselves and just their physiology as having them become more reactant to this situation. However, so let me just sum this up. Those other fish are not succumbing to the disease. We have been looking at reports of other fish. We'll talk about this more and what can we do moving forward, but we do not have die-off of the other species, which is great to hear. It doesn't make us feel good about the menhaden. We want to figure it out, but we do have less concerns about this moving into other species. And finally, as Bob said, because clearly some of those predatory fish are going to end up being caught and consumed, we don't have concerns about that. I've personally been eating them too. So, and some of you know that I fish. So it has not been an issue. Cindy?
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ray, and your team for the overview. I'm going to turn it over to Allison. So are you saying that there was kind of a pandemic going on in the fish population there? I mean, is that kind of like they all got too close together and didn't have masks and weren't like doing the separation thing? And
They're not good at social distancing, right? Because they're schooling fish, but on probably, yes, the bacterial, the nature of these things, it starts as an epizootic, so it amplifies within a fish. It can get shed from one fish to another fish. You have such a dense schooling population that those transmission factors are pretty high, and it's pretty easy for a bacterium to spread from one fish to another.
okay, I'll turn it over to Allison. Thank you again so much.
Great. So we have quite a few questions coming in. I wanted to go off of, Ray, what you were just talking about, because I think, you made it very clear about how other fish species are not being impacted at this point, but we have gotten questions about marine mammals and birds and, critters that are consuming these menhaden. So can you speak to that at all about if they are impacted or could
Sure.
be?
Yeah, I'll give you a bit of an answer. And of course, throughout, if Bob or Jan want to jump in, please feel free. We have no documentation that there has been any impact to either avian or mammalian species or any of the even crustaceans. So everything that has been consuming them, I've also seen the question, people asking, well, why are birds not eating more of the menhaden? I think it's because there was quite a bit of food available and they can only eat so much. So, over the course of time, the natural process with several species that will scavenge and take advantage of the opportunity have been eating them, but we have not had any of the mammal species, avian species, or other fish species. As Jan had pointed out, if Jan were to sample some fish, he will find the bacteria within, but not at elevated levels that would indicate that they had succumbed to this disease because the bacteria had been multiplying within its body.
And
Great. Well, that's good news. Yeah, go ahead.
Can add on birds and mammals and everything. They're not a documented species known to be diseased by Vibrio angularum or Yersinia ruckeri. So not really hosts for the disease. So we wouldn't really expect them to be involved with it, but we haven't seen it either. So just to add a little bit to that.
And Jan, while you're talking, another question that I just wanted to pose for clarity's sake, this other bacteria species that you talked a little bit about, can you speak to if that has any if humans need to be concerned about that particular bacteria?
Yeah, the same sort of advice, no concern for human health. There's no records of that impacting humans, not mammals or even other critters. This one seems to be mostly a finfish pathogen. And really most of the work that we know about it is in trout and salmon. It actually is a disease that can impact trout farms. It started out in the Midwest. So very much known in freshwater in trout and salmon. It's been reported in some marine species in Europe, like burbot and sea bass and those, but not that much known about it, known in the marine environment. But this one's probably even more so exclusively a finfish pathogen from everything that we know about it.
Okay, wow, we are continuously getting questions. Just so the public knows, we have now 34 questions in addition to all the ones that were submitted in advance. So we're going to try to get through as many as possible. One kind of theme that I'm seeing in common is related to the stressors that may have caused the menhaden to be susceptible. So I guess I'm going to make this a two-part question to try to consolidate what I'm seeing in the Q&A. So one question is, what are some of the stressors that could be causing this? Like, what are the typical things that are considered environmental stressors that would make menhaden more susceptible to this bacteria? And then specifically, what is the possible role of stormwater runoff and fertilizer runoff in this particular mortality event.
I'm going to give you a couple of the basics, and I'm going to invite Jan and Bob to jump in on the rest of it. There are a whole host of things, and we have seen some questions about ecosystem issues and why, this could be occurring. So it could be temperature, it could be oxygen, it could be salinity. It does have to do with the nature of these fish and how they actually travel and the density of their schools. So you guys said it. So since you went there, I'll say it. These fish don't really socially distance very well. They're horrible at it. They get in really, really tight schools, and I've actually even seen the question, how far up the estuaries will the menhaden travel, and how far up the estuaries are they, succumbing to this disease? They will go as far as the salinity is high enough that they're comfortable, and sometimes higher if they're being chased by predators. So that it has something to do, it is likely to have something to do with tidal flow. But we don't even know that they have picked up or begun to have these bacteria start the disease process within the rivers, because and Jan can talk about this, he's already researching what the gestation period really even is. We're not sure how long it takes them to become ill, so to speak. Bob, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add, when it comes to the Vibrios themselves, that Vibrio species, a lot of them are very, very specific. And the ones we study for shellfish, we see very big differences in, say, the salinity regime that they thrive in. So one thing that could, be a factor, as Ray pointed out, would not just be, warming temperature or warmer water. It may also be the perfect environment under a certain salinity profile. So an example would be, one of the Vibrios we study is, it likes a very narrow salinity range. You put it in pure seawater, it doesn't survive. So each one of those species has very, very specific conditions. And this species, it may be something, because I believe, talking with Jan, that they've noticed some areas of Delaware Bay where there've been some menhaden. Well, it's probably more up the bay, and you have certain salinity profiles. So a lot of them are very specific under those conditions, which would favor, if salinity is a factor, if it comes to stormwater or any kind of runoff, you have a wetter year, you might have a lower salinity up in the estuaries than you would in a drier year. And depending upon that time of year, it may not be pollutants from the stormwater. It could just be something as simple as salinity changes. Not having, we're talking about it in other areas of the state, not having a massive, freeze over this year compared to other years. Different water temperatures. So there's a lot of factors that come into play, and there's going to be a lot going forward. And I think, as we keep studying this, working together within our department and other partners, we're going to learn a lot more of what drives some of that.
Thank you for answering that question to the best of your ability. And I just want to specifically ask the question, since we are no stranger to sewage issues in the Navesink. I guess just same question, is there any possibility that sewage could be the cause for this die-off at this point, to what you know now?
I think just to chime in a little bit on this as well, because I think a lot of this bacterial amplification is happening within the fish. So we're talking about an immune system in an animal, in a fish, that can become compromised with natural stressors out there, temperature fluctuations, migration, spawning, and all these things that can impact the fish's health. And as we know, when you lower an immune system, it can sort of create an entry for some of these bacterial diseases to sort of creep in. Vibrio anguillarum isn't a bacterium that I think is really amplifying in the water by itself. I think we're talking about a fish that's amplifying it, and we're seeing this fish-to-fish transmission, kind of like that bacterial epizootic that we were talking about. A real seasonal nature to these mortalities, I think, is important to keep in mind. We're seeing these in really cool water temperatures, early spring. This is when we're seeing these temperature fluctuations, when the fish are migrating in. So it could be a stressful time. So I think it's important to keep in mind that seasonal nature of this. And if we're talking about things like fertilizers making it into the water, sewage going in, we're actually talking about nutrification of these water bodies. So adding nutrient into these systems. When you add nutrient that supports plankton, algal blooms, those algal blooms can crash, they'll die off, and then you'll have sort of a hypoxic type event. It's something that we're not seeing with this current mortality. So I think that there's that distinction there that I don't think from the patterns that we're seeing here, it doesn't appear that it would be driven by those sort of factors, just because we're talking about nutrient load in water, which could lead to DO crashes. In all of my investigations going out there, I did do dissolved oxygen profiles through the water as well. And we had really good dissolved oxygen throughout the river during the mortality, close to 100% saturation. And I think the lowest reading I got was around 80%. So I think that when you talk about these sort of events with sewage, fertilizer, you'll be talking about this nutrient, maybe lowering of the DO in the end, and we just didn't see that pattern. So I don't think that in this instance with this chronic mortality that we're seeing here, I don't think that is a big factor.
That's good news for us who have been working, very hard as a collective group to try to reduce sewage in the Navesink. So that's good to hear. Okay, so we're trying to keep to the agenda. I just want to wrap up that section, I guess, just for maybe folks that joined us a bit later, just to return back to the public health just really quickly. So there's no, I don't know, I'll leave it to you guys to, how would you summarize the public health situation that this, this menhaden die-off puts us in as far as primary and secondary recreation in the rivers?
So I would summarize it by going back to what is already on the Q&A that I know you guys will post a link to, which I also want to say now, and we'll probably say this again later. We will follow up on that Q&A and add to that list as many of the questions that are being received tonight as we possibly can, so we can be as communicative as possible to all our constituents. But we're going to stay with the same advice that we have been giving throughout. As Bob said, we're not concerned about recreational contact with water. This is very specific to finfish. However, dead animals of any kind, bacteria start to multiply very quickly. So therefore, we are remaining with, being sensible, cautious when handling the fish. We've said, use gloves, walk with boots. I don't think you want to let's be clear. We know they stink, so you don't want it on your hands anyway. So being practical to limit any exposure, particularly if you have cuts on your hands or your legs, I would minimize that. But as Bob has said, the water quality, we do not have the concerns.
Thank you. Thank you for summarizing that. And yes, I just shared the link to the FAQ that has been published by the DEP in the chat, so you can access it there. And actually, I'm throwing it right back to you to move on to the next section of the agenda, which is discussing future monitoring and research.
Okay, thanks. So gonna go right back to these guys as well again, and I just want to say that there are a number of people within the DEP. So, those of you are probably figuring out, being that I have National Historic Resources, Jan and I work together since he's in the Division of Fish and Wildlife. We work alongside Bob and the rest of their team in marine water monitoring and standards, as well as the rest of the department. So the department will remain engaged, partnering with a whole host of other people and organizations that are doing the research to understand the situation better. There will be some holes. I might forget a couple. So Jan and Bob, please feel free to jump in. But Jan has been in constant contact with other states. This situation is being documented in New York already, in case we left that out. So there are some of these die-offs occurring up there. So we're discussing this with New York and Rhode Island and some universities in state and out of state. The US EPA has been in touch with us through the water program and is now dialed in with Jan and the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. So all at a federal, regional, state, and local level, looking at conducting as much research as we can to better understand what the causes are, whether they be stressors or bacteria themselves, and what is making the bacteria multiply. All of these ecosystem situations, we will continue to monitor the best that we can. And as certainly as it applies to being in the space of the rivers themselves, marine water monitoring does have people out there. I'm going to let Bob talk about the water monitoring that they are doing moving forward. But from a practical perspective, we are making sure that marine water, as well as the Division of Fish and Wildlife, we are all monitoring the frequency and also responding to the calls that we were receiving, even law enforcement. So conservation officers who do patrol areas on a routine basis are a really good source, because they can see trends. Just simply the whirling fish. Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? What are we seeing? And sharing this information back with this entire team that's doing the research, so that we can try to find trends. Is it related to weather? Is it related to tidal fluctuations? Is it temperature? We will continue to do that research and share and collaborate with all of our partners that I already mentioned. Bob, you want to talk a little bit about monitoring?
Yeah, as we sample our shellfish waters, we have people that cover the whole state. We have 5 guys that sample routinely throughout the state. We have a captain that basically is assigned to the Monmouth County area. So we will continue to get him out there routinely. He samples all through Raritan and Sandy Hook Bay. The stations alone in Navesink that he samples covers 48 stations throughout the whole river. He also samples, almost the same number of stations in the Shrewsbury, as well as Shark River and all of them, including the ocean waters. So going forward on that, he continues to sample those routinely. He will be up there. If we do get calls, we always will. If something looks like it's getting worse, we'll always, alert him from getting those calls to say, can you go up and get some samples? As Ray pointed out, from the shellfish program side, the marine law enforcement under Ray is also responsible for administering the shellfish regulations that we have. So we are always in constant contact with them. So if they observe anything, even on a weekend, I will get a phone call sometimes directly from those officers, so we can get a much quicker response to things. So there is a very good network of monitoring and surveillance of that between both us and Fish and Wildlife of the areas to monitor the status of it. Along with that, we also we do nutrient monitoring, as well as working within our division, the beach monitoring. So I see some questions about the ocean beaches. Those beaches have been sampled for pre-season for a lot of them to start opening this weekend or within the next month. So any reports will come into our division of anything that's going on in those ocean beaches. But anything that has plans on opening right now along the ocean front, the water quality has been good. There is always the beach website for that. So people that don't know it, njbeaches.org will give you at least the bacterial water quality for recreational bathing on that site. So there's a lot of surveillance out there from counties right through Fish and Wildlife, and we will continue to monitor that too.
Yeah, and I can speak a little bit on the fish side of things and looking at these bacteria. We've got some excellent collaborators and colleagues that I'm working with, both in the USGS, Eastern Ecological Center, and in USDA, that have good experience with these. So these are bacteria that are documenting in these mortality events. So we want to know a little bit more about the virulence. So we're doing a number of genetic studies in collaboration with these groups to understand a little bit better about the virulence of these and understand these pathogens a bit better. And if they are virulent, if we can expect to see similar die-offs happening. So kind of from the pathogen standpoint and how these can be impacting fish, we're continuing forward with some collaborators to look into that. And through the New York DEC, we've been working with Stony Brook University, which has documented the die-off on all 4 sides of Long Island as well. So we've been coordinating with them and making sure that they're going through sort of a similar workflow to look for the bacterial diseases. They are documenting the same bacterial type and everything in there. So sort of joining forces to better understand these mortality events on a larger scale.
Okay. Thank you, team, for explaining all of this and kind of giving a broad overview. And it's pretty obvious that it's a complex issue and looks like it's perhaps tapering, but it's not yet completely done with. So I have some questions, from pre-selected ones from, with regard to future monitoring or future research and how citizens can also help. So you mentioned that you were collaborating with, all these different agencies and trying to find a solution to this. So is the DEP planning to come up with, some type of a consolidated report when this is over to document whatever was happened and in terms of relative abundances of these die-offs where you saw what was, DO was not the factor and things like that? Is the DEP planning to come up with a report aside from the FAQs?
There will be a report on my side that's usually publicly available, even through monthly reports. But I think this is an important scientific question. And as a scientist, I think we're wasting our time doing stuff if we don't try to publish this and make it publicly available to other scientists to be able to follow up on. So certainly from my perspective, any important work that's done, I think it's important to get it peer reviewed and into scientific publication, and this is no exception to that. So in the long run, we're not going to get there right away. That's going to take some time, but that would be the where I would see this being communicated. I think that when you're challenged with scientific problems, when you get it out into the published literature, it allows other scientists to see these problems and gets it documented. And I think that that's really important to do. These things.
So considering the vast expanse of this, die-off, does the DEP have any near-term strategy to continue this monitoring of menhadens to continue into the season and beyond? In addition to the, the environmental monitor, there are 2 aspects to this. One is the menhaden monitoring in itself, and the other one is the monitoring that Bob was mentioning, right, in terms of what's the environmental stressors. And from what you indicated, this particular one doesn't seem to be affected by dissolved oxygen, at least. It's not triggered by that. But you're also mentioning that there's a second pathogen that's perhaps involved. So is there going to be some type of, effort in that direction, or is it being in the works?
So I think clearly there's going to be an effort because we're already collaborating with all these other agencies as well as internally. As resource managers, we do want to make sure that we minimize all the impacts to all of these species and to have the most positive effect we can, not only for the fish stock, but also the quality of life for everyone in and around the watersheds. So I do want to point out, though, as I mentioned earlier, that the menhaden stock is quite healthy. One other factor here, when you're asking about whether or not we're going to continue to monitor this, the answer is yes, absolutely. And I will also state that because these die-offs and even sometimes resulting in fish kills that occur with menhaden, this is factored in to management of menhaden already. So, Marine Fisheries Administration and the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, we do factor in that there will be some die-off. So this has been monitored for a long period of time, and this year is not any different. But we have an applied focus because we're committed to make this, to minimize this the best that we possibly can for all those reasons.
How can, one question that we kept, being asked is how as a community, we can help, and organizations like Clean Ocean Action or partners, how can we help in, kind of addressing some of these issues, like mitigate stormwater runoff? That's one thing. But aside from that, are there any specific, recommendations that the DEP can think of and suggest, like riverfront towns, like for example, like Red Bank? So what can they do to reduce or, basically to reduce or mitigate future kills? Are there, any recommendations, preliminary recommendations based on what you've been seeing these past few months? Or
That's a really broad question. Understanding that, so I think that there are many other factors here. There's other regulatory schemes that are in play for that. For stormwater as well as NGIPTs and other things, which I think is. But as we're discussing that some of these ecosystem triggers, we are looking at them all, but we don't know that any of those are actually a factor in the fish kills or the die-off. So I think that in the near term, as Bob and Jan had already alluded to, that some of the citizen science and the eyes and ears and the reporting into us continues to be helpful. I would say, generally speaking, as we're trying to gain more information and become a little bit more educated and collaborate with all the other researchers who are out there, we definitely want to understand trends, and we definitely want to gain as much data as we possibly can. So it's not just Jan alone, but we have other folks in Division of Fish and Wildlife that we can, obtain samples on. We have them. I will say that, I appreciate everyone who's going to want to call and say there's some dead menhaden. We are very much aware of that. We will take those calls through the DEP hotline and log it in. But I think what we really are interested in as well is if there are occurrence of other species, we certainly would appreciate those calls so that we can make sure that we have the best information possible, especially if there are other species that become affected. With that, I want to mention that I know that there is always going to be some, there is natural mortality in all animals. So we've gotten some calls about, a couple of striped bass or a couple of bluefish and some crabs. I don't believe that, any one of those is going to be an indicator of something. But if, the general public were to see 10 or 12 along a beach of a given species or a conglomeration of a few game fish, we'd be interested in trying to obtain samples, not for anybody in the public to grab, but give us a call. And we will even work, potentially with some of our partners to get those samples so that we can gain as much information as possible. So I think that, to answer your question, to try to have as much sharing of information as possible is going to make things a little bit easier for us to gather more.
Okay, that's helpful. And should Vibrio being, widely distributed in coastal environments and seems to be a warm, temperature species, should we be concerned and look ahead to potential impacts from climate change related warming as well?
Well, as everyone is aware, we at the DEP are taking a lot of efforts to mitigate against climate change, sea level rise, resilience. So this is another factor and an indicator that even National Historic Resources, which is my world with fish and wildlife and parks and everything else, we are a part of the bigger puzzle for DEP, and we'll continue to do that work. As we pointed out, this occurrence in the Navesink and the Shrewsbury, we want to know more about why that is occurring there, but we do not, we're seeing it in other places. We've all mentioned that there is an occurrence in Delaware Bay, and we have occurrences around Long Island, as Jan has just shared. We don't know that it's an occurrence of any one thing, but we will, as we become more informed about what those stressors may be, we may be able to be in a better place to inform any potential changes that are needed to minimize this in the future.
Thank you. Can I get one last question in? There was one specific question in the Q&A about understanding the healthy population that you mentioned. Can you just briefly talk about it? Like, how do you determine that the Menhadens are currently at, you know, a healthy population level? So it's like a stock assessment. What is it exactly? And how frequently is it done?
There is a very thorough stock assessment of all of our resources that are within our regulatory structure all the time. So, with us today is Joe Cimino. He's the administrator of the Marine Fisheries Administration, which is part of the Division of Fish and Wildlife that reports up to me. And Joe and his entire staff, this is what they do for a living, is stock assessments, across the region and across the coast, and certainly within New Jersey. And as I said earlier, they do factor in for allocations what potential die-off may occur, particularly in Menhaden, because we know how susceptible they are to these situations. We know that annually for decades that there is going to be a certain amount of Menhaden die-off. This past year has been more so than usual, but the stock assessment itself, I really don't think we want to spend the next hour, Cindy, going into stock assessments overall, but we are very comfortable. The stock assessment is thorough and the stock health is very good.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Swarna and Allison, for moderating the panels, and most grateful to the team, Ray. Thank you, and thank Bob, and thank Jan for your taking the time to share and go into depth with the folks, and also, most importantly, committing to having this be a longer term conversation. I think those of us that have lived in this area for a long time, haven't really seen, it may have been around for 50 years, but we never really saw it. We never really felt it. It's been increasing over the years, but it was a real shocker this year. And we had a lot of shocks over the last year. So it was just kind of a nasty little stinky fish on top of what was really not a really fun year. So really, thank you so much. And we look forward to continuing the conversation over the months. And I guess what I'm hearing is that it's never really going to be over, right? I mean, given that it's out there in the environment and that fish gets sick, just like we get sick, it will always be out there. But the scope and magnitude is what we're really kind of concerned about, and maybe having to kind of try to limit from what you're doing.
Agreed. And thank you for having us. We do want to be able to be as communicative as possible. We do, as I said earlier, we do understand the sensitivities and the impact on everyone's quality of life and just concern for natural resources. I think that's fantastic, considering that is our business. So we're concerned as well. As you know, Cindy, I've spent a lot of time on the rivers myself throughout the course of my life. I have seen the spring die-offs in the Navesink for years, but I did observe myself this year. It was higher. Without question, no doubt, which is why we're applying as much focus as we can and try to learn as much as we can. And I don't think we'll ever see it just go away, but I think if we understand better why it's occurring, then perhaps we can manage it better and minimize those impacts and have a healthier fish stock and a little bit more fun in and around the river.
Yeah, a little less stinky fish. Absolutely.
I think you should be quoted with that little stinky fish on top of a bad year. That's a pretty good one, Cindy. Go with that.
Yeah, it was, Mother Nature motivates me. What can I say? Anyway, well, that's a great segue to our next discussion, getting you additional resources perhaps to help you all be able to do the research that you need to do. We're so grateful to Senator Vin Gopal for joining us today and his leadership, that he stepped up early to help the municipalities address the challenges that they faced. And of course, we have Mayor Jay Coffey from Oceanport and Councilwoman Megan Walker from Oceanport, who, who stepped up to meet the challenges. And I'm going to turn it over to Kari Martin, our advocacy campaign manager, who's going to lead us from here. So I'll see you in a few. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. We've heard a lot of details about this fish die-off and some really technical stuff, but also some information that will be helpful in us moving forward. But to move forward, we will need some support as the municipalities and the citizens along the rivers noticed and experienced this time around. And we are so thankful to have Senator Gopal here tonight to give us an idea of the legislative response and opportunities that we have in front of us, perhaps to understand what we can do to manage the challenges that we face in the future should this happen again. So, and then we also have Mayor Coffey, who is my own mayor. I'm so happy to and thrilled to have him on board here, and Councilwoman Megan, a dear friend of Oceanport and advocate of all things environment. So Senator, would you like to start off with some comments about your response to the fish die-off in our communities?
Yes, sure. And I apologize for not making eye contact just so I don't get to an accident. But I appreciate everything that Clean Ocean and Cindy and all of you guys have been doing since day one. Obviously, big challenges with the quality of life. Mayor Coffey has been extraordinary, as have Mayor Pallone. I've been working to try to secure some funds in the state budget, which I think we're in a pretty good place to help those towns that want to do some initial cleanup efforts. We got some federal funds in and some other resources. I've reached out to all of the towns in the Two River area, even the ones outside district. I've spoken to a number of them. I've got 3 towns right now that have expressed an interest on submitting some reimbursements that I'm working with them on. They are Oceanport, Long Branch, and Monmouth Beach. I've reached out to the other towns, said if you guys have a vendor that I'm more than happy to share the vendors of that Long Branch and Oceanport used. I'm more than happy to help. I have not heard back from the other towns, except only one I heard back from was from Shrewsbury, who said they were not interested in pursuing this. The other towns, I think I'm going to do one more round circle on them because the state budget's going to be squared away. And, the costs are coming out somewhere around between 20 to 40,000, depending on the municipality on these cleanup efforts. And then we're going to look through and maybe talk with Cindy and try to figure out some long-term solutions if there are funding. Obviously, funding is always difficult, but specifically some of the neighborhoods I toured in my district, Long Branch, with Mayor Pallone and Congressman Pallone, the quality of life was so bad, and it wasn't just the fish at that point; it was the bugs and everything else, and the birds, and it was just getting really, really bad. I flipped over one fish and thousands of maggots all over. This is on people's backyards. So we're pleased that we're getting cleaned up. And again, a big kudos to the mayors, Mayor Stickle and Mayor Coffey specifically, who literally each and every day was calling me. And I wish I heard from other mayors like that. He was calling every day, and he's not even in my district. And Mayor Pallone, they've all been great. But we're hoping the other towns take advantage of it. I know Mayor Perry had expressed an interest in Middletown. I think Little Silver Rumson had expressed an interest, but I haven't heard back from any of them. And I'm going to try to follow up because I do want to be helpful. And we have a small window because of the federal resources that came in this year from the American Recovery Act, where we might be able to get some funding to help with this. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your incredible response in reaching out to the towns. And so we have Mayor Coffey, if you would like to give a review of what you saw and the response that Oceanport provided. You are on mute, sorry.
I should know better by now. We were faced with a different task than really Long Branch had, in that their fish were concentrated in small little ravines or inlets, and they were in some places knee deep. So they used a jet vac system. We've got a little over 11 miles worth of shoreline in Oceanport, and we didn't have the concentration of fish in specific areas that Long Branch had. So in turn, we had to look at a different type of cleanup effort, and ours was a little more hand and foot intensive. The contractor that we hired sent 2 boats, 5 people, and with rakes in their hands and hazmat suits, they scoured the front lines of the shorelines and just picked up the fish where they could. Anywhere there was a bulkhead, there really weren't any fish, but it was the dead fish were in the the grass and the foliage that abuts the water. And we took over 6,000, close to 6,000 pounds of fish off the shorelines. There were some places we couldn't get to because at low tide, the boat couldn't navigate there. But I think we hit about 80% of our riverfront properties and got as much fish as we could. And it made a demonstrable difference. We're still faced with a fly problem. I think that might carry over for a couple of weeks because, as Senator Gopal said, the maggot infestation was remarkable. The men that were doing this pit cleanup just said the fish weighed a lot more than they normally would have because of so many maggots. And it's amazing. We have flies that are the size of quarters. They were probably just born 2 days ago. They're so large and so numerous. It's amazing. But we couldn't have done this really. We coordinated through our Two Rivers mayors connections, but it was prompted by Senator Gopal. He got us to talk to each other. And a lot of it, quite frankly, had to do with wind and tides, where the fish ended up. And I talked to Bob Neff in Little Silver, and he just changed the winds and had all the fish come over to Oceanport. So we took care of them when they landed here. So, but it was an incredible effort. Our BA and Councilman Tverdik were coordinating everything. I was going out on my paddleboard to see how things were going, and I couldn't believe the difference in the water. The most striking thing, not aside from the fish, was the difference in the water on the Manhasset or the Branchport Creek side as opposed to the Blackberry Bay side. Branchport Creek kind of looked like the Willy Wonka Chocolate River for the most part, and our side, the other side, the Blackberry Bay side, was very clear, but the amount of seaweed was frightening. It looked like it does normally in August or September. This was only May, so there's a lot to be addressed in the rivers.
Thank you, Mayor. I was wondering for both Senator Gopal and Mayor Coffey, if there are some lessons learned for the response and the steps that need to be taken right away. Maybe I know that there was some time from when the first fish were reported dying and floating and struggling to when actual response happened. And I know that was frustrating for some citizens. So is there any kind of lessons learned that we can apply to maybe the next time, or document so that we can have a response or prepare for a response through funding, have something in place that can inform what kind of funding we need?
That's a great question. I think with any issue you learn, right? They learned during COVID, during Sandy. When this happened and the smells just started, it took a couple of days to hit. Residents started reaching out, and then it was to try to figure out why this was happening. We didn't really understand. DEP, to their credit, was great. We called, but they were still, I think, a lot in the early part of the process too. But so we got, I got all the mayors on the call, and we're all trying to guess on what kind of vendor does this, who does this, how do we find such a vendor, how do we make sure that they don't price gouge us, right? Because they know that every day that these fish are out here, you got angry residents, and so they could probably go pretty high on the price, and there's not much we could do. So, hey, how do you make sure that doesn't happen? And how to get the vendors and how to, I'm hopeful we're going to get as much of this reimbursed back as possible. But let's say something at a larger scale happened, a small community like Monmouth Beach, that's going to break their budget. I don't know how they have to spend. We're estimating. I'm hoping this doesn't go more than 80 to 100,000 on this cleanup. But if this is way worse, or more towns wanting to try to participate in this, this could have really hurt some of these towns' budgets. So I think those are a few of the lessons. In a situation like this, if this happens, what are the steps? What is the coordination, and who's coordinating really? Is it the role of the county to coordinate the towns to do this? Is it the role of DEP to do this? Was it my job? Or is each town just on their own, even though the waters connect and touch? So I think those are all things to think about in the future. Just a real quick, just so you guys can see, I want to come out here. If I could reverse this area right here, I'm in Long Branch, was literally thousands of fish 2 weeks ago, maggots everywhere. and these guys walked out and cleaned everything, and now everything is gone. It's completely different. But just the impact of, as the mayor said, I can't imagine picking these things up. It was one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen.
And this was definitely different because when our past fish kills, the fish get concentrated in the deeper recesses of the rivers, and it's in one area. This was everywhere. It was on my paddleboard. They're dying in the middle of the river. They're in the Sandy Hook Bay. It's everywhere, and it was spread out so far, unlike anything I've seen in 50 years down here. And so I think we, like pretty much we did with COVID, we did it by the seat of our pants, trying to figure out what's the best method, and it really probably was a hit or miss function on our part, and we hit this time because the tides were right and the fish were there. But if we're going to be faced with this in the future, I agree with Senator Gopal. I think there has to be a more reasoned approach to this, or more general approach to it, rather than each town having to worry about their specific shorelines, because this is state water, and really municipalities benefit from the water, but it's something, this was unlike anything we've ever seen before. And I was just happy the way we all coalesced around each other and tried to figure out solutions for ourselves.
Yes, and I know that you probably had countless calls from homeowners, and many of these towns did, and with hardly any answers for what to do. And if the DEP, if Ray or Ray maybe be able to join this discussion, is for homeowners. I know that we've had some discussions about what homeowners could specifically do while the response was coming around and developing. So I know that we've heard from people that they were raking the fish back out into the water. They were considering cleaning it up with shovels themselves. So there was a variety of homeowners taking on their own initiatives because they just couldn't wait any longer. It had gotten so dire. So Ray, could you speak to maybe some of the things homeowners, I know you talked about wearing gloves and things like that, but what are the acceptable ways to handle fish washing up on their shoreline or, in their backyards?
First, I just have to make a comment that the mayor and the senator have done an incredible job of taking the bull by the horns and improving the situation for everyone. So, hats off to them. That was a really incredible effort. And as the mayor had mentioned, I was shaking my head behind the camera that he was absolutely right. And that is what we were speaking of earlier about this being a die-off and not a fish kill. That really does summarize that. Fish were dying in the middle of the river, they're dying up in the creeks. Certainly it did seem like they got into tighter waters, up in Manhasset. Then you'd see more there as a concentration or dead fish that would float in with the tide. And some people have asked, we're seeing them in the ocean. Are they dying in the ocean? Likely not, unless they were infected and affected in the rivers and swam out, or they just simply got pulled out by the tide. So I think that every situation everyone had individually was very different. Some places, as Senator had pointed out, like massive concentrations with a lot of fish decomposing and obviously flies and getting maggots on them. I mean, there is no doubt there were some of those situations right in people's backyards. And then there were other situations where people had a handful. So our advice throughout has been, you like we said, you can rake them back into the water. And some people were asking about that. Yes, natural processes and the scavenging crustaceans and even the smaller fish, they will consume it and it will not hurt them, and that'll go into the system. So they can be raked back. We do recommend that people take practical precautions, putting on gloves, using a shovel. They can be bagged. If it was my house, I would double bag it. They can go into the waste stream, at a residence or even in a business in small quantities. My colleagues within DEP who are on the regulatory side in solid waste had given some advice to the mayor and other entities about and trying to coordinate with the landfill for disposal. That's more large scale. So I think that for homeowners, yes, you can go out and, practically pick them up. put with gloves or a shovel, or just simply wash your hands and don't handle them if you have cuts on your hands. But get them in a bag them up and get rid of them. We've been asked, can you bury them in your garden? And will the bacteria affect anything? That's a great question and a pretty decent solution if you don't have volume. If you have a handful of fish, that's a great idea, and it would benefit your garden, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that certainly doesn't work at volume. So yes, rake them in, put them in the trash, speak with some of your local officials about something that is more at scale. And again, hats off to everyone who was involved with those cleanups. It was really great effort.
Thank you, Ray. I think there are some questions, mainly mentioning that this has been happening, fish kills have been happening for 50 some years and have been documented. Perhaps, and this is related to Swarna's question earlier about a report. So documenting the information and documenting what is known for perhaps, since this has been happening for 50 years and there is no plan in place to help the municipalities do have a response and to help homeowners understand how they can do a cleanup. I'm just thinking that this bears the need for a coordinated response and not an instantaneous one that was so well pieced together. But I think this is certainly an instance where we can learn from what we've found and learn from what needs we have in the future. And I appreciate Senator Gopal for taking us on a short field trip and show and tell. There was a significant difference in the cleanup effort. There may be some places that were not reachable still. Just driving around myself, did notice just the aroma is still there in some places because there are some difficult nooks and crannies in our watershed that's hard to get to. So that does beg the need for different types of responses for future should this happen again. And it sounds like the information from the DEP is actually suggesting that we are not in the clear at the moment and there's still more research to be done. With that, I'm just going to turn it over. Let me just check the questions here. Cindy, would you like to take the reins and help with the wrap up? You're on mute.
Thank you so much, Kari, and thank you, Senator Vingopal, for your leadership and for pulling everybody together. I mean, I think that's always the common solution, right? Get everybody together and figure out, with a common commitment to find out a problem. And I'd like to just suggest, Ray, rather than grabbing the bull by the horns, it's grabbing the fish by the gills. And I want to just thank also the mayor and councilwoman for stepping up and, again, working together to find solutions. I think it would be great to come up with sort of some of this information on a list in case it happens again. I mean, we hope it doesn't, but having been through it, it would be a shame not to, as Ray from DEP, or I think it was Jan saying, let's get it in writing, let's put it down, let's get a benefit out of the horrible experience. Because if it is happening in other areas, let's say it's not happening here in our backwaters, but it's happening somewhere in Rhode Island or Connecticut. And Senator, I'm really hoping and looking forward toward, working with you to see if there's some way we could get some state accommodation in the budget to allow for some, for wacky things like this, right? I mean, whether it is or may not be climate change related, there's a lot of crazy things that are going on because of climate change. And we should, I think, try to be a little bit more flexible in having the ability to address those things. And I would just like to say, bless you to those folks that did clean up the mess. I know they were paid, but oh my goodness. I mean, they really, stepped up and did something that I don't think any of us could even, I certainly would not have been able to do that. So bless them. And I'm going to turn it over to Allison. So just wrapping up from myself, thank you to the DEP, Ray and Jan and Bob for your participation tonight and for your entire team's participation. Thank Acting Commissioner La Tourette for, providing us this opportunity. And I'll turn it over to Allison to wrap it up.
Thank you, Cindy. So I'm just going to kind of repeat some of the headlines from the beginning of the meeting. As I mentioned at the start, attendees can expect to receive a post-webinar email, and that will include a link to view the recording of this meeting if you'd like to go back and catch some of the things you may have missed. It was a lot of information, which is fantastic. The email will also include links that we've shared in the chat, including the DEP's FAQ page, which they will continue to update, the Rally for the Two Rivers Facebook page, and instructions for how you can sign up to get emails about the Rally for the Two Rivers. Just so you know, following the Facebook page and or signing up for the emails is the best way to stay up to date about everything that's going on with the rally. And on that note, please save the date for our next Rally for the Two Rivers meeting, which will be Thursday, July 29th at 7 p.m. Most likely virtual, I think, although things are starting to look better again, which is great. So I kind of just want to sum everything up. As we learned during tonight's meeting, the DEP is still trying to understand all of the environmental factors that were involved in this particular fish die-off. But even before this mortality event, we knew that the Navesink and the Shrewsbury Rivers were facing water quality issues, which is why we have these meetings. It's why we're all here. It's why the Rally for the Two Rivers was established and still exists now. So it's clear that we all can do more to become more waterway mindful, as we like to say at Clean Ocean Action. And that just means becoming more aware of our impact on our local water quality, and which goes in hand with understanding the things that we can all do personally to help improve our water quality. So on that note, I'd like to invite everyone here to attend an event that we have coming up that's full of ideas and opportunities for how you can personally become more waterway mindful. And that is our Rally for the Two Rivers EcoFest. So this will be our third annual EcoFest next Saturday, June 5th at Victory Park in Rumson between 9 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. And it's just a wonderful, fun morning. It's a free, family-friendly educational event that's hosted jointly by Clean Ocean Action and the Rumson Environmental Commission, along with participation from many of our alliance partners that I'm sure were on the call this evening. So they will all be there teaching many different ways to become more waterway mindful, and just it's a great opportunity to learn more about these issues that we're facing and what you can do to help. So we hope you'll join us. And all that said, again, I'll reiterate what Cindy said. Thank you so much to all of our speakers and to all the attendees for the amazing questions that we received, very thoughtful. So I'll thank everyone one last time for joining us tonight. And with that, I think we can close out this fantastic meeting. So meeting adjourned. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Thanks again.
Bye, everyone. Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.